My name is Mandy, and I was never the kind of person who cared about impressing others. At 34, I had everything I needed: a successful business, a beautiful home, and a life I built from the ground up. But sometimes I felt like I was still that 16-year-old girl sitting at a family dinner, trying to hide the sting of their sneers behind a smile. Tonight was supposed to be different. It was Thanksgiving, and for once I thought maybe this year would be the one where my family would finally see me for who I really was. Not just as the girl with the junk car, the one who worked too much, or the one who wasn't good enough in their eyes. As I pulled up to my parents' house in the old Toyota Corolla, I felt the familiar weight settle in my chest, the familiar pang of being looked down on. The car wasn't new. It was a 2008 model that had been with me through thick and thin. Reliable, sturdy, and practical, just like me. But to my family, it was just another reason to mock me. Another thing they could use to prove that I hadn't made it. I parked behind my cousin Alex's sleek black Porsche, and I could already hear the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from inside. The house, as always, was pristine, with its manicured lawn and perfect holiday decorations. The table would be set with silver cutlery and fine china, a setting designed to impress anyone who stepped foot in this place. But I knew that none of it would matter. Not to them. "Hi, Mandy." My mom greeted me with a polite smile when she opened the door, but I could see the judgment in her eyes as she looked past me, her gaze lingering on the car. "Hi, Mom," I said, stepping inside, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. Inside, the dinner was already in full swing. My cousins, aunts, and uncles were chatting around the grand table. I noticed Alex, the ever-confident cousin, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile as he talked about the latest real estate deal he'd made. Then there was Karen, the older cousin who never let a chance slip by to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. She was perched at the head of the table, talking loudly about her husband's new job at a prestigious law firm. "Still driving that junk, Mandy?" Karen's voice rang out, too loud, too deliberate. Everyone turned toward me. Her words cut through the noise like a knife, and I felt every pair of eyes on me. I smiled, the way I always did when I was uncomfortable. "It's reliable," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It gets me where I need to go." The room fell silent for a moment before Alex chimed in. "I mean, seriously, Mandy, how long are you going to hold on to that thing? You could afford something way better if you just let go of that old pride of yours." I could feel my cheeks burn, but I kept my cool. This was nothing new. It was their way of reminding me that I didn't fit in, that I wasn't one of them. The ones who were successful, who drove fancy cars and wore designer clothes. It was easy for them to forget that I had built my success from scratch, not inherited it or married into it. But what did it matter to them? "Well, maybe I like it this way," I said, taking my seat at the table, trying to deflect the sting of their words. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't just holding on to my old car out of stubbornness. I was trying to prove something they'd never understand. I had worked hard to get where I was, and the last thing I needed was their validation. "Anyway," I said, changing the subject, "how's everyone else doing?" I took a sip of my wine, hoping to steer the conversation away from my car. But before anyone could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it briefly, but then quickly glanced up again, just in time to catch Karen rolling her eyes. "Always so busy, aren't you?" she said. "Maybe if you spent less time working and more time enjoying life, you wouldn't be so uptight." I opened the text message on my phone quickly. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the name on the screen. It was Jennifer, my assistant. She'd been with me since the beginning of my business, and she knew everything about me. Everything that mattered. "Your jet is ready, ma'am," the message read. I froze, my hand still gripping the wine glass. And for a moment, the world around me felt like it had slowed down. My gaze moved across the table, meeting each of my relatives' eyes. Their expressions shifted in a split second, from smug amusement to something far different. Shock, disbelief, and then curiosity. The noise around me seemed to fade, and all I could hear was the pounding of my heart as I held up my phone. And without missing a beat, I read Jennifer's message aloud. "Your jet is ready, ma'am." The table went completely silent. The kind of silence that feels so thick, you can almost taste it. "Excuse me," I said quietly, setting down my wine glass. "I need to take this." As I stood up, every pair of eyes followed me. The familiar sneers were gone, replaced with a look I couldn't quite place. Sudden realization, maybe? Or was it fear? Either way, the tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. I stepped into the hallway, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Pride, defiance, but also a small twinge of regret. I hadn't meant to expose them like this, not in front of everyone. But I'd been carrying this weight for years, and tonight I wasn't going to hide it anymore. They could think what they wanted, but I wasn't the same person they'd always belittled. The sound of Jennifer's voice on the other end of the line brought me back to reality. "Everything's in place, Mandy. Just let me know when you're ready." I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of power and control that had defined my success. Maybe tonight wasn't about impressing my family. Maybe it was just about showing them the truth. With a sigh, I turned and headed back into the dining room, my eyes meeting each of their gazes, knowing that things would never be the same after tonight. I walked back into the dining room, my footsteps slow, deliberate, as though the weight of the moment was pressing down on me with every step. The silence around me was unnerving, the kind of silence that says everything without a single word being spoken. The family, once bustling with their usual chatter, now sat frozen. Their glasses, filled to the brim with wine, remained untouched. The clink of silverware against fine china had ceased. All eyes were on me. I stood there for a moment, surveying the room, taking in the stunned faces. Alex, the cousin who'd mocked me the most, looked as though someone had slapped him across the face. His usual confident smirk was nowhere to be found, replaced with wide, startled eyes. Karen's mouth hung open slightly, her perfectly painted lips frozen in surprise. My parents, well, they had the look of people who had just been blindsided by a force they never saw coming. It was a feeling I was getting used to, watching them react as if they had no idea who I really was. I cleared my throat, the weight of their stares making my palms sweat. "Sorry, Jennifer's just confirming the final details," I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounded in my chest. I could feel my mother's eyes boring into me, her gaze heavy with something I couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Guilt? Or perhaps, in that moment, a realization of just how far she had underestimated me. "Jet?" My father finally spoke, his voice sounding almost foreign, as if the words had gotten caught in his throat. "What do you mean, Jet?" I could hear the disbelief in his tone and the irritation that followed. My father was a businessman, a successful one by all accounts, but he'd built his success the traditional way, through years of hard work, managing investments, and climbing the corporate ladder. To him, wealth was meant to be worn and displayed like a trophy. The idea of quietly amassing millions in a way that was invisible to others was something he simply couldn't comprehend. "It's just something I've been working on," I said, my words careful but firm. "I built my company from the ground up. It's not about flaunting my success. It's about what I've done, not what I've got." The room shifted. It wasn't a dramatic shift. No one jumped up, no one shouted, but the air seemed to crackle with the tension. The collective realization that the quiet little cousin they'd mocked all these years had done something they never thought possible. "I think you should have told us sooner," my father muttered, his voice low, more to himself than to me. "We could have helped you. We could have—" "No," I interrupted, the word leaving my mouth sharper than I intended. "I didn't need your help. I didn't ask for it. This was my choice." I looked around the table, taking in their faces, their confusion, their surprise. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, no longer the confident, cutting cousin I had always known. She looked smaller somehow, unsure of herself, as though the very foundation of her superiority had been shaken. Look, Mandy. Alex finally spoke, his voice tentative, almost pleading. I didn't mean anything by it. You know, the car. It's just, it's hard to understand why you'd choose to live like this when you could be living, well, like us. I could feel the familiar burn of resentment rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Now wasn't the time for that. You don't get it, Alex. You don't get why I do what I do. I don't need the newest car or the biggest house to feel validated. I don't need the trophies. I don't need your approval. Aunt Denise's voice cut in then, sharp and judgmental as always. It's a bit late for this whole humble act, don't you think? If you're going to live this life, why not just admit it? Why the secrecy? All these years and you never once thought to mention it? I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't flinch. I didn't want to be seen as a success because of my possessions, Aunt Denise. I wanted to be seen for who I really am. Not the car I drive, not the clothes I wear, not the house I live in. The table fell quiet again. Even Aunt Denise seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. My mother, sitting at the head of the table, had her hands folded neatly in her lap. She said nothing, but her eyes were locked on me, her face a picture of something between disbelief and regret. I couldn't hold back the frustration any longer. You all acted like I was invisible. You laughed at me behind my back. You treated me like I was lesser. I've been sitting here for years, hoping that one day you'd see me for who I am, but it's always been about what I have, not who I am. Alex opened his mouth as if to speak, but closed it again. No one knew what to say. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating almost, as though the silence was pressing in from all sides. They hadn't known this side of me. They hadn't known what I was capable of. To them, I was still that girl with the junk car and the silly little business, not the woman who had built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch. Finally, it was my grandmother, Ruth, who spoke. She had been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, watching everything unfold with a kind of knowing calm. "I've always known you were special, Mandy," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You don't need their approval to be great. You never did." The sincerity in her words almost broke me. Grandma Ruth had always been the one person in this family who truly understood me. She never judged me. She never looked down on me for my choices. It was then that I realized something profound. I had nothing to prove to them anymore. They had spent years looking down on me, assuming I was insignificant, that I didn't belong in their world. But here I was, and they had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. For a brief moment, I thought about the future, how things would change from this point on. There was no going back to the way things were. I had to wonder, though, if they would ever truly accept me for who I was, or if the approval they offered now was simply a reflection of my success, not of me as a person. But whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let them define me anymore. Not now. Not ever again. The tension at the dinner table hadn't fully dissipated when I stood up, excusing myself with a vague, "I need a moment." I walked out of the dining room, my heart still hammering in my chest. I needed a breather, a moment to gather myself before the storm that was undoubtedly brewing in my absence. I didn't head for the bathroom, though. Instead, I made my way to the back of the house, stepping out onto the patio where the cool air hit my face, offering a temporary reprieve from the overwhelming emotions swirling inside me. My hands were shaking, but I took a deep breath and steadied myself. As I leaned against the railing, I let my thoughts drift. I hadn't expected that kind of reaction. Not from them. It was one thing to hear their disapproval, to feel their judgments, but seeing the look on their faces when I revealed my success, it was something else entirely. I glanced out at the horizon, trying to calm the storm inside me. There was no denying it anymore. I had changed. I wasn't the girl they all used to put down, and I had worked too hard to get here to allow their perceptions of me to hold any weight. The sound of footsteps behind me interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see my father standing at the door, his face softening as he approached. He was trying, I could tell, but he still didn't quite know how to handle this. Not the way I needed him to. Mandy, he started, his voice hesitant. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't know what, Dad? That I wasn't a failure? No, He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't know it had gotten this far. You've always been so quiet about it. So humble. I almost laughed at that. Humble? That's how he saw me? As quiet, modest Mandy who never spoke up about her achievements because they didn't fit into the box he had created for me. Dad, I said softly, I didn't want to talk about it because I wanted you to see me for who I am, not for the things I own. I've been telling you all along, in my own way. But you never listened, did you? You only cared about what you could see. His expression faltered. I could see it. The realization that his perception of me, of my life, had been wrong all along. I didn't mean to, he started, but I cut him off. I know you didn't, Dad. But sometimes your actions speak louder than words. I've spent my whole life trying to earn your approval, but you never asked about what really mattered to me, about what I wanted to build. I don't need your validation anymore, not like I used to. There was a long pause before my father nodded slowly, as if processing everything I'd said. I can't undo what I've done, he admitted, his voice low. But I can try. For you. I was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. For the first time in my life, I saw him try to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. I didn't know if it was too little, too late. I didn't know if it would ever be enough. But part of me wanted to believe that this moment could be the beginning of something different between us. I appreciate that, Dad. But it can't be about just fixing things for the sake of it. It has to be real. He nodded again. I'll work on that, Mandy. I'll try to understand you more. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and smiled. A small, genuine smile. That's all I've ever wanted. As I turned to walk back inside, I noticed the other members of the family had gathered in the living room. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and awkwardness, unsure of how to proceed now that the reveal was over. It felt almost like a slow-motion train wreck. Everyone waiting for the next move. I took another deep breath and walked in, my eyes meeting my cousin Alex's. The guilt was evident in his eyes, and I could see him struggling to find the right words. Look, Mandy, he started, his voice careful. I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I didn't know. I had no idea. I nodded, appreciating his attempt to make amends. I get it, Alex. But understand this. What I drive, what I wear, none of that defines who I am. My worth isn't wrapped up in any of that. And neither should yours be. The room fell silent again. But this time the silence felt less charged, more contemplative. The family had been forced to acknowledge a reality they had spent years denying. They dismissed me, underestimated me, and written me off as someone who hadn't made it. Now, they had to face the truth of who I was and what I had accomplished. I turned to my mother, who had been eerily quiet since my announcement. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, looking almost fragile. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes staring at the floor as if searching for the right thing to say. Mom, I said softly, do you have anything to say? She looked up, and for the first time that evening, I saw something resembling regret in her eyes. I didn't know you felt so overlooked, she whispered. I thought you didn't want us to know. I thought it was your choice to keep it quiet. I walked over to her, sitting down beside her. I've always wanted you to know, Mom. But I've also wanted you to see me for who I am, not for my title or my wealth. All I've ever wanted was to be accepted as I am. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to fix this. I wish I'd seen it sooner. You don't need to fix it, I said gently. Just try to be present. Try to understand. For a moment, everything was quiet again. The harshness of the past few years, of being misunderstood, underestimated, and pushed aside, felt like it was beginning to lift. But I knew the journey wasn't over. This was only the beginning. There would be more battles, more moments like this. But I was ready for them. Ready to stand my ground and be seen for who I truly was. The days following that Thanksgiving dinner were a whirlwind of emotions. The truth had been laid bare, and my family, once so confident in their assumptions about me, were now navigating the wreckage of their ignorance. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, unshaken by the judgments and expectations that had weighed me down for so long. But as much as I had hoped that my family would suddenly begin to understand me, I knew better. Change wasn't instant. It wasn't a magic switch that could be flipped. The process would be slow, and there would be setbacks. The first few days after the dinner, I received a handful of messages from my parents. Texts filled with half apologies and attempts to explain themselves. My father's message stood out. "I still don't understand why you kept it from us, but I'm proud of you, Mandy. Let's talk more soon." It wasn't the grand gesture I had hoped for, but it was a start. For once, I felt like I wasn't fighting an uphill battle on my own. I had been invisible to them for so long, and now, slowly, they were beginning to see me. But I wasn't naive enough to think this would be the end of it. I knew my father would continue to measure success by things like money, status, and power. That's how he had been raised. And that's how he had built his own empire. It was hard to erase a lifetime of that kind of thinking, but I couldn't help but hold on to hope that maybe, just maybe, he would see me for who I was, and not just as the daughter who had gone a different way. It was a few days later when I received a call from Jennifer. She was as calm and collected as ever, but there was an edge to her voice that I didn't quite like. "Mandy," she started, "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." The urgency in her voice made my stomach churn. "What is it?" I asked, already mentally bracing for whatever news she had to share. "I've been hearing things, from clients, from investors," she said, hesitating. "They know about your family, and they're starting to question your business practices, your connection to all that wealth." I paused, my thoughts racing. "Are you saying they think I'm just using my family's name to push my company forward?" Jennifer didn't respond right away, but I could hear the tension in the silence. "It's not that they think that directly, but they're starting to wonder if your success is tied to who you are, not just what you've built." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. It was as though everything I'd worked so hard to achieve, everything I'd fought for, was about to be overshadowed by the very thing I had spent so long trying to hide. My family's wealth, their status, their connections. It was like it was all suddenly being weaponized against me. "I didn't want to tell you this," Jennifer continued, "but I think it's time to have a conversation with the investors, with your team." I shook my head, frustration welling up inside me. "I can't believe this. I've built this company from the ground up, and now—" "I know," Jennifer interrupted gently. "But you need to understand, Mandy. They don't care about the blood, sweat, and tears you've put in. They care about the image. And right now, the image isn't what we need." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. The very thing I had fought to distance myself from, my family's influence, was now threatening to unravel everything I'd worked so hard for. My heart raced as I processed what this meant for the future. The truth of who I was, the authenticity of my journey, seemed to be slipping away, just as the world around me demanded a version of success that fit their expectations. After a long pause, I spoke. "What do you suggest?" "There's no easy way around this, Mandy. But we have to address it. We need to separate you from your family's wealth and connections, completely." It was a hard pill to swallow. I had always prided myself on staying true to who I was, on not letting my family's status define me. But now I was being asked to take another step, to disconnect myself from everything that had brought me to this point, to erase the very foundation that had shaped me. Okay, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. I'll do whatever it takes. But I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend I didn't build this company on my own terms. I know, Jennifer said. And that's what we're going to make sure people understand. This is your company, your success, no one else's. We hung up, and I sat there in the silence of my office, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I couldn't help but feel a little lost. I had always known that success came with sacrifices, but this felt different. This felt like I was being asked to erase a part of myself, one that had been a significant part of my identity for years, but there was no turning back. The moment I had revealed my success, the moment I had let the truth slip out, the game had changed. Now it was time to face the consequences, to rise above the whispers, the doubts, and the expectations. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my parents. We need to talk. I have some things to discuss with you. As I pressed send, I realized that this moment, this turning point, wasn't just about my business. It was about reclaiming my narrative. I couldn't let anyone, not even my own family, rewrite my story. And I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. The conversation with my parents was inevitable. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but it had to happen. So when I arrived at their house a few days after my talk with Jennifer, I wasn't sure what I'd find. My parents were still processing everything, still struggling to reconcile the image of their daughter with the woman who had built a multi-million-dollar company. I wasn't sure if they'd ever fully accept me for who I was, or if they would always see me as a reflection of their own ambitions. When I stepped inside, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her gaze distant. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I could feel the weight of her silence. My father was nowhere to be seen, but I knew he'd be around soon. He always was. My mother was the more overt one in the family, but my father's judgments were often more biting, hidden beneath his polite smiles and carefully constructed words. Mom, I began softly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. We need to talk. She set her coffee cup down and finally looked at me, her expression guarded but not unkind. I know, she said, her voice quiet. About what happened, about everything. I nodded. I don't want to pretend that I've been honest with you, or that you understand everything. But I'm not going to hide who I am anymore. I've worked for everything I have, and I'm not ashamed of it. She sighed, her eyes looking away for a moment, as though trying to find the right words. I never wanted you to hide, Mandy. I wanted things to be perfect for you. I wanted you to have everything I didn't. Mom, I said gently, you've given me so much. But I'm not you. I don't need the same things you did to feel successful. I don't need the luxury cars or the grand vacations. I need to be seen for who I am. Not for what I have, but for what I've built. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I never realized how much I held on to what I thought was success. I thought it was the only way to show you how much I cared, how much I wanted the best for you. I know you do, I said, my voice softening. But I've had to find my own way, my own version of success. She reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. It was a simple gesture, but for once, it felt genuine. I'm sorry, Mandy. I've always loved you, but I guess I never really saw you. I only saw the things that I thought mattered. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her acknowledgement, though I still wasn't sure how much had truly changed. It's not just about what I've achieved, Mom. It's about who I am. And I need you to see that. I need you to see me, not just the idea of me that you've built up in your mind. She nodded, her eyes misting with unshed tears. I'm trying, Mandy. I really am. Just then, my father walked into the room, his presence filling the space like it always did. He was dressed in his usual immaculate suit, his posture as perfect as ever. He looked at me, and I could see the mixture of pride and uncertainty in his eyes. It was the same look he'd had when I'd first started my business. proud but hesitant, unsure of how to relate to me when I wasn't walking the path he'd envisioned for me. "I think we need to talk too," he said, his voice more hesitant than I was used to hearing. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I agree, Dad." He sat down next to my mother, his hands folded in front of him as though he were about to deliver a speech. "I'll admit, I've always had certain expectations for you," he began, his voice measured. "I thought you were meant to follow the same path we did. The right schools, the right connections, the right career." I felt a pang in my chest as he spoke. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading. The moment when I'd hear the full weight of his disapproval, the judgment he'd kept hidden all these years. "But," he continued, "what I didn't see was that you've created your own path. You've done it your way, and that's something I can't ignore anymore." I blinked in surprise. Was this really happening? Was my father actually acknowledging my success? "I'm proud of you, Mandy," he said, his voice firm. "You've proven me wrong. I never thought you had it in you, but you've done more than I ever could have imagined. And for that, I owe you an apology." I felt a lump form in my throat, and I swallowed it down. "I never needed you to think I was good enough, Dad. I needed you to see me as someone who didn't have to follow the same rules, someone who could create something of my own. And for a long time, I felt like I wasn't enough because I wasn't following your blueprint. But I am enough, and I've been proving that to myself every single day." My father looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching, as though he were finally seeing me for the first time. Slowly, he reached over and placed his hand on top of mine, a gesture that felt both new and foreign. "I can't say that everything will change overnight," he said, his voice steady. "But I'll try, Mandy. I'll try to see you for who you are and not just who I wanted you to be." I smiled, a genuine smile this time, and nodded. "That's all I can ask for, Dad." It wasn't a perfect resolution, and I knew it wouldn't be. There would be moments of discomfort, moments when my parents, especially my father, would still slip into old habits. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally being seen. Not for what I had, not for the expectations they had placed on me, but for who I truly was. As I stood up to leave, my mother hugged me tightly, her arms wrapping around me in a way that felt different from all the other hugs we'd shared. This one was real. "I'm proud of you, Mandy," she whispered, and I believed her. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, standing tall, true to myself, and finally beginning to heal the wounds that had been left open for far too long. 6 months had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, and though the shift had been slow, it had been undeniable. My life, my relationships, my identity, everything had changed. But more than that, I had changed. I had finally learned to stand firm in my truth, to embrace the success I had built, and to stop apologizing for who I was. Today, I was preparing for a meeting that felt different from all the others. This one wasn't about new investors or the next big partnership. This meeting was about solidifying my place in the world, not just as a CEO or a businesswoman, but as someone who had fought her way to the top on her own terms. The agenda was simple. I was meeting with the executives at Nexus Technologies to outline the future of the company and our mission. As I walked into the conference room, I couldn't help but smile. The team I had built, the people who had been with me since the early days of the company, were seated around the table. Jennifer, my loyal assistant turned business partner, sat at the head of the table, her usual calm demeanor radiating confidence. She had always believed in me, even when no one else did. "Good morning, everyone," I said as I walked in, taking a seat at the table. I could feel the energy in the room, the same energy I had worked so hard to cultivate over the years. A culture of respect, of shared values, of authenticity. It was a far cry from the world I had grown up in, where success was measured by possessions and status, not by purpose and connection. "Mandy," Jennifer said, her voice warm but professional, "we're ready to discuss the next phase, the expansion into the international market, the social impact initiatives. Everything is on track." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in. There was so much we had accomplished, and so much more to do. But this time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt empowering. I was no longer afraid of the challenges ahead. I had learned to embrace them, knowing that I could handle whatever came my way. The next phase is about more than just growth, I began, my voice steady, filled with conviction. It's about staying true to our mission. We've always been about helping small businesses, giving them the tools to compete in a corporate world that often leaves them behind. But we can do more. We need to do more. I glanced around the table, meeting the eyes of each person in the room. I want us to focus on our social impact initiatives. I want to expand our tech education programs, create opportunities for young people in underserved communities, and help bridge the gap in digital equity. We've already made a difference, but we can make a bigger one. Jennifer smiled. I love that direction, Mandy. And we've got the resources and the team to make it happen. I've already started reaching out to some nonprofit organizations that can help us. I felt a surge of pride as the team began discussing the logistics of the expansion. For the first time, the conversation wasn't just about profit margins or client acquisitions. It was about something more meaningful. It was about using our success to create real, lasting change. As the meeting progressed, I found myself reflecting on the path that had brought me here. There had been moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I was enough. But now I knew that my success was not just a product of hard work. It was a product of my authenticity. I had learned to be true to myself, to embrace my strengths and my flaws, to accept that my worth was not defined by the opinions of others. When the meeting wrapped up, I stood up and looked around the room. Thank you, everyone. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and I'm excited for what's next. We've built something special here, and I know we'll continue to grow and make a difference. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt before. There was no more tension in my chest, no more uncertainty about who I was or where I was headed. I was no longer hiding behind a facade, no longer trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. I had created my own path, and I was walking it with confidence. Later that evening, I sat down to a quiet dinner in my home. A home that was still modest by some standards, but perfect for me. As I ate, I thought about the changes in my family dynamics over the past few months. They had come a long way, and I had too. My relationship with my parents was still a work in progress, but we were starting to understand each other. My father, in particular, had been really trying, to see me for who I was, not who he wanted me to be. A text buzzed on my phone, interrupting my thoughts. It was from my mom. I've been thinking about what you said, and I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I see you now, Mandy. I see the woman you've become. I smiled, a lump rising in my throat. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. As I finished my dinner, I reflected on the journey I had taken to get here. It had been long and hard, full of challenges and obstacles. But through it all, I had learned the most important lesson of all. Success is not measured by the things you own, the car you drive, or the titles you hold. Success is about living authentically, about being true to yourself, and about using your voice to create change in the world. I looked out the window, the soft glow of the streetlights casting a warm light on the quiet neighborhood outside. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace. I had finally become the person I was always meant to be, the woman who didn't need anyone's approval to know her worth. And with that, I knew that the future was mine to shape, on my terms.